and unsurpassed,
That's penetrating and perfect Dharma
is
is worthy met with even in 100,000 helpers.
having
Having
it
this to see and listen
to remember and accept. I vow to taste the truth of the Tathagata's words. All right. Well, good morning, everybody. Good morning. So, joining us on Zoom, we've got Rannigan and Mark, and with me here at the Zen, I've got John and Joe and Kimberly and Glenn and Jill and Chris. So, yesterday morning, I kind of came, I received the inspiration from somewhere, from Shunyata, to begin with a teaching from outside of Buddhism that actually I can recall back during the COVID era when I was doing these talks from my home. Everybody was receiving them from their homes. It was entirely a Zoom operation. But the teaching that I wanted to come back to these 5 years or whatever later, and I'm sure I'll be taking it in a different direction. It's one of these teachings that can go in many different directions, but it's referred to a few different ways. The two most typical ones are the law of the instrument, and the other one is Maslow's hammer. And what it's basically saying is if the only tool you have is a hammer, you tend to treat everything as if it was a nail. So I guess I had two thoughts that came to my mind as soon as I started down this path this time. The first one was in connection with the three poisons. And I'll set aside the poison of ignorance here, since that's kind of the root poison, but just kind of connect this with the two poisons of greed and anger, hatred, which we could also see as instruments, I guess, within our lives. And if they become pretty dominant instruments, I think we can see the truth of the law of the instrument at work with reference to how the poisons play out. And by that I mean, if greed, lust is dominant in us, then we're looking at the world as a storehouse from which we are to derive as many possessions as possible. It's like the hammer and everything's a nail. Greed, everything's something I can have. And anger, hatred, same way. If that's our dominant perspective, then everything we encounter. I'll inject here another kind of second tier poison, a judgmental mind. I think anger and hatred often kind of filter through becoming judgmental. So the whole world then is kind of like filled with all these, I'll call them legal cases that we're going to render judgment on, out of our grounding in anger. So to look at this law of the instrument view through a Buddhist prism, how it applies to the existence of the poisons within us. And what I'm referring to here, just as is the case with the law of the instrument, isn't, having a hammer when the occasion calls for it. You use it for its intended task. But it's when it's the only tool you have. And all too often, and we can see evidence of this, certainly in the world around us, but if we look inside, we can see how we'll go through periods where maybe one of these poisons is really playing a pretty prominent role. And I think the law of the instrument, if we look deeply into that, we may find it's actually coming into play. Everything around me is something I could have, even though I might already have one. But two's better than one, right? So, and so on. And if we're in anger mode, the judging becomes just second nature. We just go there. So it's the dominance that it takes on. To have wouldn't even use the term greed. If I later this afternoon, in the heat of the day, if I decide, like to have some ice cream, so I go out and make such a purchase. But I'm probably not going to do it again later in the day or even tomorrow. So wouldn't call that greed for the ice cream. And if I didn't get it because something came up and I couldn't do it, I'd be okay with that. It wouldn't ruin my day. And anger, it's the sort of thing. We've talked about this before, that there are triggers for anger. It's not that we should never get angry. But, especially in these polarized times, we can pack that away and we've got it in a place within our lives where it becomes kind of dominant. And then judgmental mind is ramped up and ready for every encounter. So I thought perhaps this law of the instrument might be helpful for all of us in how we kind of catch ourselves. And say, well, I don't want to, if that's the way I'm approaching things, kind of as a matter of course, then I need to look at that. Because I think it's safe to say that for most of us, probably all of us here, but even out in the broader community, most of us, if we really look at this matter, we don't want to go through always carrying that attitude, that response to things. So that's the first part of the law of the instrument I wanted to bring up this morning. But there's one other aspect to it, which I think we all, and I mean all in the broadest sense, we need to be paying attention to. As I think you are all aware of by now, I've got an interest in artificial intelligence and its developments. Well, that's an instrument. And it's an instrument that will probably become a Maslow's hammer. It will become the dominant tool. It's well on its way to doing that. So when that happens, using this metaphor, what does that look like? What do we give up to the instrument? We're already well down the path of being almost fully guided by AI. inject itself into most anything. You know, when prior to the Wilco concert, I remember going online to look up something pertaining to them, and the first thing that came up was an AI, as it always does anymore. The first item that comes up will be an AI synopsis. And what I was looking for had to do with since it was concert related, not recording, you know, it was the sort of thing that made me feel good about my fandom, because it said, you know, in the concert, on the concert meter, it was kind of like distilling over 300 reviews and put Wilco in the top 5%. Kind of like highly recommended, and listed all the qualities that you would get from the concert, from their presentation and their musicianship, and so on and so forth. So I was, you know, obviously I'm saying, yeah, Dean, but I get these AI messages routinely enough, and I initially, you know, I would just stop there. And I've read that others have had that same response, and they've kind of pulled back. And I've made an intentional practice of doing that as well. Because if that becomes the dominant tool, then the searching I'm accustomed to, where you scroll down and you start investigating other pieces to it. But AI is trying to give you the total package. They've analyzed it. Voila. So to look at AI as a very likely Maslow's hammer that we're dealing with right here and now. So just those were the two things that came to my mind in terms of looking at this metaphor a second time. And I have no recollection of what I did with it the first time, but it wasn't this. I know that. So that was the first thing I wanted to get across this morning. And another point that I wanted to talk about, because it ties into the first two chapters of Inside the Flower Garland Sutra, which is looking at the relationship between the relative and the absolute. Kind of like Dongshan's Five Rings, which is about that relationship. Just want to throw that out there too, is another connector to Dharma teachings that many of us are familiar with. But since we're early enough in this study of the Flower Garland Sutra and the song of Dharma nature, which is kind of our gateway into its teachings on interdependence, I wanted to just say a few words about this relationship between the universal and the particular. Because it's obviously it's a dualistic view. You know, we have the universal and the particular, the ultimate and the conventional. But the real kind of secret sauce there is the fact that they're not separate. They're not dualistic. They are one. And we come to this practice because we're so familiar with the conventional and the relative, and we have this sense that that's where that aspect of life that I'm trying to treat here. So when we learn about the universal, that's what I'm looking for. We're still caught up in this dualistic view. So we're going to push aside the conventional, the particular, and we're going to settle right into the universal. And the thing is, it doesn't work that way, because now you're still rooted in a dualistic worldview. If you want to enter into the non-dualistic realm, we have to merge those together, which is why I often use the phrase about the sacredness of all things. And this comes up in these opening chapters where the use of Dharma is Dharma as the myriad things. That the myriad things are the universal. The universal does not exist without them. And because all beings are Buddha nature or Dharma nature, to use the language that we're working with in Ben's book, then the practice that we call equanimity immediately comes forth for us. Well, I need to treat all dharmas, all the myriad things, with that same mindset. So that's to further enter into the realm of the non-dual through equanimity, which is to see things as being non-different, non-distinct from the universal. They're all just these individual, unique aspects of it. Without them, there's no universal. The universal can't possibly exist without them. That's what it's all about. And the dharmas can't exist without the universal. And I think for many of us, probably most of us, that's kind of what leads us to the path, because we're immersed in the particulars, and yet we're not finding any satisfaction there. There's nothing we can really derive that's meaningful. So we go on a spiritual journey to see, is there something beyond just the world of the particular? And hence we encounter in Buddhism a teaching that addresses that. But the danger is we can misconstrue it because of our dualistic minds. So it's so important that we recognize, even though we talk about these two aspects of reality, it's just one. It's just one. Just like in Taoism and the yin and the yang, they don't exist apart from one another. So we can separate them out and look at them. But in the well-known symbol used to designate them, it's one. It's one symbol. You don't have separate symbols. This is yin, this is yang. They're merged. That's the beauty of that depiction, is it makes it so clear visually. Oh yeah, I get it. Think of the absolute and the relative in a similar way. So the heart of our practice is the care and the reverence for all beings, all dharmas. That's equanimity. So as I presented it a few weeks ago through the teachings of Donna Haraway, staying with the treble, making odd kin with all beings, so that they're all, with kin, or at least with some kin. With children would be a classic example. Not, you love them all equally. Sometimes it was easy for me. I only had one, so I can always assure her she's my favorite child. You got favorite child status. But that same view, to be able to spread that across all beings. So that's what I love about Haraway's creation of that term oddkin, making oddkin. So, and seeing the universal in the particular, what I would say there is the key, to my mind, is that we do that without losing the particular. To see the universal, but it's still the particular. Its unique, rich existence. Because this isn't about some homogenization of the myriad dharmas. Just because we respond to them in the same way, with the four Brahma Viharas, loving kindness, compassion, sympathetic joy, and equanimity. But they're all unique. So don't lose the particular, because we're looking at the universal that encompasses all dharmas. To be able to see the universal, but not throw away the particular, not lose the particular within that. Just like for me and my love of jazz, there's this universal form of we call jazz, and who knows what that is. Even that, it's a term that we could use. But a lot of people, most musicians are somewhat uncomfortable with it, because it's like you're building some sort of a box, and that runs counter to what it's all about. So to be able to appreciate the particular of what might get thrown into that box, but not get focused on, oh, well, that's jazz, and that's jazz. We can use that term. It can be helpful in some respects. But to be able to really fully appreciate that particular piece of music and not get caught up in worrying about the connection with the universal. We know it's there. And jazz is just part of a greater universal, music in general. And you can keep expanding it outward and outward. So it's a tiered sort of analysis. But shunyata, emptiness, boundlessness, has space for each particularity in its particularity. So that's another way of seeing this union of emptiness and the conventional. Is emptiness has space for all of it. And with that understanding, maybe that opens up a window into the sometimes puzzling teaching that everything's perfect and complete just as it is. Everything, every particularity, including ourselves, and every aspect of ourselves. But then that doesn't entail that we don't practice. You know, our tendency, again, because our dualistic mind is to say, well, it's perfect and complete, then there's no need for practice. And as Dogen taught in Genjo Koan, and throughout other teachings of his too, but especially in Genjo Koan, we have to practice. The metaphor of fanning yourself, like Master Baoji. Even though we are perfect and complete, just as we are. But we have to continue to see that deeply. Because as soon as that stops, then we're right back into the dualistic realm and we get caught up. So this path that I've got us on here, I started down the path before John's Dharma text that got texted out that day. So I jotted that down so I could share it with you here. I could have relied on John's memory to recite it for us, but I won't do that.
That's not.
This was a longer one. I thought I'd better write it down. But I think it ties in, so I'd like to share that for a second time with you. When we awake to the reality that has not been processed by ego-centered mind, we cannot help but have compassion for all beings. We realize that we live together with all beings, supported by networks of interconnection. We share air, water, and life by offering ourselves to each other. We live supported by all beings. In turn, we must support all other beings. This is compassion. And that comes from Living by Vow by Shohaku Okimura. So, and a further tie-in I wanted to include this morning comes from a text I've been working with here for the past week or so. Buddhist Biology by David Barish. We're getting the mirror image here, so it's not going to be too it's written by a biologist, an evolutionary biologist, as well as an aspiring Buddhist, he describes himself as. And he's been involved in the development of sociobiology as well as the field of peace studies. And it does have some academic heft to it. So it's not to be looked at as some sort of new agey stuff. Just the publishing house that the book was brought out by is testament to that. This is the venerable Oxford University Press. So, and I deeply appreciate his observations of the connection between Buddhism and science. So I just wanted to share a couple of passages, all of which occur within the span of just a couple of pages. he says, first, with the growth of modern biology, appreciation of nature's complexity has likewise grown, such that complexity and interconnection are an axiom of today's biology, no less than of Buddhism. This complexity and interconnection, which is why I mentioned when we first started into this, that kind of a side path I was going to be following is on work within the field of complexity. Because if you're going to talk about interdependence in 2025, that's what it looks like. It's very complex. And the incredible thing is, most of you are familiar with the term chaos theory, probably. That's been around for about 40 some years now. What they found is out of chaos, it doesn't remain chaotic. Orderliness forms out of that disorder. Things like fractals, which I'll be introducing in subsequent Thursday night talks, where it's repetitious in a scalar fashion. The same pattern occurs in a smaller size all the way down until, of course, there are limits. Once you get down to the molecular level, it's kind of, you're going to lose that pattern. But it can drop down a number of different levels. But even if it's just 2 levels, it still they share certain qualities. And one of those, there are examples of the arising of order from disorder. And the fact that seems to kind of be baked into the nature of reality, is this seeking after order. And I'm going to come back to that in a few minutes here, because it has some social political ramifications too, in terms of order within society, and how each individual person, it's kind of like a basic need for orderliness. So we could see one of our responsibilities as members of society as helping to promote order for all members of that society. That's a key to the well-being of the greater society, the need for orderliness. And we have the capability of facilitating order. But the 3 poisons kind of get in the way of that. Hence the importance of our practice, as it relates to complexity and the orderliness that can arise from it. So however much chaos might get created in this country, and of course, because of interdependence, it won't be limited to this country, clearly, we still will have the capability of seeing order come back. That's important just for purposes of morale to have that understanding that it is the nature of things, and we can see that all around us. It's not just wishful thinking, pie in the sky stuff, Pollyanna-ish stuff. It really is the nature of reality. It's kind of like when usual examples of like chaos would be in fluid dynamics, where the flow becomes chaotic. But yet it then so very often turns into a steady, orderly stream. In fact, I had just learned about within laser technology that if you put too much energy into creating a laser, it becomes chaotic. It starts pulsing irregularly and it becomes literally unusable as a tool. But yet, with just you would think, oh my God, it's going to be a Herculean effort to get a handle on that. There's so much energy in there, but actually, just the teeniest little tweak, if you know what you're doing, settles it right down. So we might look at chaos around us and think, oh my gosh. But if you really just apply something small, the larger steps can sometimes be kind of like the side effects, we might say, can almost defeat the purpose. And what's more effective, at least initially from what they're finding, is just to be able to make minor adjustments. Because nature, it's kind of like it's already on board with that project. So it's not like you're trying to reroute the whole thing. You just need a little tweak. And it's a ready participant. You know, I'm imputing intention, I know. But here, I think that's a helpful metaphor, at least. It wants to come back to order. It's just nature. And that chart of Kleber's law that I passed out a week or so ago, plotting the relationship between mass and metabolic rate, is an example of this orderly pattern that exists. And there are myriad examples, similar examples. That's what gets people in that field so excited. There's all these things they're uncovering that come out of chaotic scenarios. So that brings me to the final point I wanted to share this morning, which will bring the sense of order to the social political realm and the spiritual realm. But again, it's not Buddhism, although this person was well disposed towards at least Mahayana Buddhism. And the philosopher I'm speaking of is Simone Weil, whose dates are 1909 to 1943, a French philosopher and often also termed a mystic. So she kind of had a religious conversion to Catholicism, but not the church or the institution. She had no use for that, as is typical for the mystics within that tradition. So just a little bit of background information on her. And I was just familiar with her name and didn't know much about her. And from touching on this, prompted me to put in an order for her best known, most popular book. So that'll be for further down the road, but definitely struck a chord for me. And I realized this is somebody I need to get to know a little bit better. She was very involved in things like the trade union movement, took the side of the anarchists during the Spanish Civil War, spent a year working as a laborer so that she could better understand the working class. Wow. It brought to mind Barbara Ehrenreich, a social scientist from our time. And she did a book called Nickel and Dined, where she went out and took on jobs like working at a Denny's, or working at a Walmart or as a maid, and lived on the wage. So, I mean, she did the work and lived the lifestyle and wrote a book about it. I never read the book, but I did. Cleveland Public Theater put on a play based on the book. And it was one of the most incredible experiences. I'm so glad I went to see that. Somebody that actually went through. And it depicted her, living that life, doing that kind of labor. So as soon as I read that about Simone Weil, well, she's my kind of woman. I need to, and she became increasingly religious and inclined toward mysticism as her life progressed. In fact, when she died, which was of heart failure at the age of 34, and at that time she was in exile in Britain because France had been occupied by now. She died while working for the Free French government in exile in Britain. And she had restricted her food intake in solidarity with the inhabitants of Nazi-occupied France. She felt the need to put herself in their place, in their shoes. And most of her writings didn't attract much attention until after her death. And she had several pivotal religious experiences. The first one was being moved by the beauty of villagers singing hymns in a procession that she just stumbled across while on holiday in Portugal. And that kind of like a Kensho experience in Zen. So that triggered something. And then in Assisi, of course, the home of St. Francis of Assisi, she experienced a religious ecstasy in the Basilica of Santa Maria degli Angeli there, the same church in which St. Francis had prayed. And she found pure joy in Gregorian chant that she felt the possibility of living divine love in the midst of affliction, just from that, receiving that sound. And then that brings me to how I first kind of got triggered into investigating her further. This happened several weeks ago. David Brooks, a New York Times columnist who often has some interesting spiritual comments to make in his columns, he incorporated her into one of the pieces he did. And he quoted one line of hers: "Order is the first need of all," which I thought was a pretty powerful statement. And then he went on to kind of summarize her teachings and practices along those lines. He said, she emphasized that the social order is built on our obligations to one another, the texture of our trustworthy relationships. All humans need to grow up in a secure container within which they can craft their lives. Kind of almost like along the lines of the French, a declaration of rights and obligations. Rights are nothing if they don't include obligations. And the last thing about Simone that I will include here is she felt that humility is incompatible with belonging to a social group chosen by God. That's her objections to the church. No matter if that group is a nation or a church. You know, if humility, certainly with the impact of St. Francis on her, that was pretty core piece to her practice and understanding. That you know, to build your orderliness based on the nation or church you belong to was going completely counter to that. Now you're raising yourself up. You know, make America great again. Greatness doesn't have to figure into it. As she's saying, make everybody secure and give them order in their lives. That's a mission. That would be one well worth undertaking. And she argued the church has become a social convention entangled with the interests of those who exploit others. And we as well. I mean, within Buddhism, we can dualistically pull ourselves back from that. But I frankly don't see that we're entitled to do that. Becoming a social convention entangled with the interests of those who exploit others, one of the first things that pops into my mind is mindfulness. Pulled right from Buddhism. And entangled with the interests of those who exploit others. To use mindfulness. I'm not saying this is the mission of John Kabat-Zinn or anybody who's in that about that business, but it certainly has fit into corporate America as a way to increase productivity and other benefits.
Has it?
Yeah, are you familiar with him, John Kabat-Zinn?
Yes.
Yeah. So I mean, it's just that taking mindfulness and just treating it on its own. Now
But I don't think he does.
He doesn't, but by setting up mindfulness based, others have come in. It's others that have used it for other reasons.
Right.
So I'm not pointing any fingers at him at all.
No.
I think he's done a lot of good.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
May I say?
Oh, sure.
The thing is, when we are all like whatever we do, like creatively or and using Kabat-Zinn as an example, he's putting that out there. In my mind, the way I interpret it is to make it more accessible to the culture we live in right now.
Right.
And so, just like anything, like even you uttering words,
Exactly.
the myriad of things,
Right.
people can take that and do what they will, and it's
absolutely.
Yeah.
That's why I want to make
and
it clear.
sometimes they don't know that they're doing it maybe for. Sometimes it's like what you started out with, like the blank, like the umbrella, like the big ignorance.
Right. Yeah.
And sometimes we are just carried by, we as human beings are carried by just our causes and conditions, all the karmic
Exactly.
Yeah.
Because the term here was that how, and I'm taking it beyond the church. She was saying that the church has become a social convention entangled with the interests of those who exploit others. And what I'm suggesting is that this entanglement is happening at other levels too, and it impacts everybody. Not, and we're not immune to this. That's the only point. I shouldn't have even mentioned anybody's name because it's not to say, this person's doing something problematic. It's the entanglement. It becomes entangled in objectives that are far removed from what the original practice was, which is why a comment in my own response to the mindfulness-based practice is that mindfulness is just one part of the Eightfold Path, and those 8 pieces all are intertwined. That you can't pull them out and separate them from the others. I mean, you can in terms of studying them and to get a richer view of the whole picture. But it kind of comes back to this relationship between the universal and the particular. So mindfulness is one particular aspect of practice, but it's connected to the universal. Without its connection, and another part of the Eightfold Path is right livelihood. So maybe if it's going to be incorporated into the corporate world, for instance, it would be nice if they at least included right livelihood too and presented it as a package.
But I really do think is using mindfulness as an example. That's a point of entry. And I've seen people that have had that point of entry because they were just suffering their lives and they needed to learn how to meditate.
Right.
And then I've seen them then get more immersed and then the Eightfold Path
Right.
and then struggle.
Yeah.
And then ultimately make big changes in their lives so that they are doing.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, so it's
much good has
I think
been
it's
done.
all good.
I wouldn't say it's all good. I'd say much
I
good.
guess I just don't read about the negative. I guess I'm just ignorant about it. It
And
would be
actually,
interesting.
yeah, there was a book published called The Happiness Industry. It did generate a whole industry.
Sure.
And like any industry, it was fed by the revenue stream. They were not in it to liberate for the benefit of all beings. That was just a path. That was part of the path. But the primary mission was this. You could make some serious money here. So yeah, it was studied at some depth, which is why I make the comment. But what you're saying is also entirely true.
Yeah,
it's done an awful lot of good. And as I've made the comment in the past in this regard, that from one way of looking at it, even when it's done from this standpoint of a capitalist overlay, but it's kind of like, and your comments are suggesting this, you're kind of planting a virus within that corporate overlay by teaching mindfulness to employees. It might benefit the corporation, which is their only reason for doing it.
Maybe not.
But at the same time, it's going to, a certain number of the people are going to respond in exactly the way you're suggesting. They're going to really, that's just step number one, and it's going to set them on a whole new path. So that's why I looked at it as it's kind of like a virus we're planting in capitalism. So be careful, you capitalists, how you use mindfulness. That's all. So I recognize the great good that can come from that. But I also recognize that corporations bringing it in that's not their driving force. I've worked in the corporate world, and if you went into a meeting and you laid that out from some sort of humanistic perspective, you know, whoever the guy from the finance department was, or lady, they're immediately going to say, yeah, but what's the cost benefit analysis here?
Yeah.
And the benefit is going to be in dollars and cents. You could say, well, people are going to be happier, more content.
I think it's just an and. I don't think, is capitalism bad? I mean, here we are, we're living it.
Yeah. Oh, we are. But I'd rather not be, frankly.
And I understand.
Yeah. Yeah.
I struggle with that.
Yeah. Yeah.
And yet.
And I don't see that as a viable future. That's,
no,
I guess.
It's not. It's
yeah.
not sustainable.
Yeah. John?
As you've been giving this whole talk, because my brain works the way it does, and you said I want to focus on greed and hate, the first thing that came to my mind, well, let's think about ignorance.
Oh, sure. Yeah. And which is the root.
What I realized from that is ignorance is more tricky than the other two in many ways, because the biggest thing, the most important thing I think that I've learned recently is that the source of the word ignorance is ignore.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And we can ignore on purpose, or we can ignore accidentally.
Yeah.
I mean, just because we were not exposed to something.
Yeah.
And thinking about how that works, even within the chaos that you're talking about, that can have the same power as well. I don't know that there's any great thing here, but it just struck me that ignorance works exactly the same way, and is probably a bit more complicated in some ways.
Yeah. And actually, I kind of look at its role within the three poisons. It's like it's the root poison.
Yeah.
And then greed and hatred
grow
out of it. So it's the core root.
I mean, a good point of just what you were talking about with Kim. You can, as we talked about with Buddhism, you can misuse anything.
Yeah.
Exactly.
And that grows out of it.
Exactly. And the reason I'm always looking to make that point and maybe direct a self-attack towards Buddhism is just because that makes it our practice, because it's all too easy to say, yeah, but that's those people. That's not the case. I just want to make sure, I'm always kind of pointing to that. Because it's a natural reaction to say, that's them. I'm clean. To see that we're all kind of tarnished, but yet we're all perfect and complete, just as we are. So that's why it wasn't intended as an attack. I think John Kabat-Zinn had the noblest of reasons for launching what he did, and has done so much good with it. But others, it's the entanglement. And that's way beyond his control. And, am I saying that it's been a bad thing he's done? Heavens no. It's been a wonderful thing he's done. But we need to be aware that, it's these other parties have also tapped into that. That's all. That's why, when the book, The Happiness Industry, came out, I said, I need to dive deeper into that, because I had that suspicion, as a lot of people did. Mindfulness was everywhere. Everywhere you turned. It was like the buzz thing going on. And I knew, boy, I know why that's the case, because it's kind of the hot item. And everybody gathers around, oh, we could make a buck off of that. Everybody wants it.
And now, unless you're a Buddhist, you don't hear about it very much.
If the demand is high, the supply will follow. It's basic capitalism. It's not people following the precepts. So that was the whole sum total. And it's simply pointing to the fact that we're practicing in the world. And all of this is subject to entanglements. So we need to know that. That's part of interdependence too. And actually, one point that the author of Buddhist Biology makes about interdependence, which I think, to my mind, is kind of accurate in comparing Theravadan teachings on it to Mahayana teachings, as we're seeing and will continue to see through Ben Connolly's book. Interdependence for the Mahayana is on the whole a very positive, beautiful thing. In the Theravadan tradition, dependent co-arising is generally, it's mapping out the source of dukkha. So it's cutting through causality to release yourself from dukkha. So they're two very different approaches to interdependence. The 12-fold chain of dependent co-arising begins with ignorance and ends with all the bad stuff. And then you're right back again to ignorance. So it also facilitates the view of rebirth. It's that wheel that you're constantly on. That's causality in that Theravadan perspective. But you come into the Mahayana, and this is another pointer to the impact of Huayan, is Indra's net, and everything is interdependent. And it's why we are in harmony with one another. Potentially. But within that, there's a lot of chaos too. And that's where work in complexity really, I think, helps open our eyes to that fact. But that even that is trending towards this sense of orderliness because of interdependence. So even though we stray from that, the forces are, and our practice is to help us. We're in alignment with that. So if we are fully aware of interdependence, then we can promote it and see where we fall into disorder, and and without the bludgeon to apply, but just our small individual ways work to treat it. That's to live an awakened life from a Mahayana perspective. And how prajna counteracts ignorance, wisdom. Understanding the nature of myself and of all beings. Joe?
Just a point for John. I was listening to a Dalai Lama talk some years ago on the three poisons. And as far as ignorance, he made it a point of saying that when Buddhists refer to ignorance, they're talking about a purposeful ignorance, not an accidental ignorance. And therefore it makes the poisons what they are, the hatred and desire coming out of something that you're purposefully ignoring.
I'm going to guess that point probably is derived from the view of karma, because karma is intentional. So I think it's kind of connecting the dots, you might say. Because I would tend to take a broader perspective of ignorance myself. The purposefulness becomes a little problematic, especially in our time, because it can be almost subliminal. So we need to be able to recognize that and factor that into this analysis. I don't know that anybody sets out to intentionally be ignorant, and not in terms of not well educated, but in terms of ignoring things. I think they can be led down that path, but it's a little more subtle rather than just, intentionally going to ignore. They're led there.
I think it also, coming from a psychiatric standpoint, we have to deal with the semi-conscious and unconscious mind, and
Precisely.
how does all of that fit into, that's why I said it's very complex in terms of how it all plays out. But that's the part that, for me, I still need to do a lot of thinking about all of that.
Yeah, and I agree. It's not that I'm trying to throw out a pat explanation of ignorance, but I'm a little reluctant to subscribe to that thing about the purposefulness, because I think it's more complicated, as you're saying. It's not. Yeah. That's
All
what.
of the, I just think of the obstructions and how they can be pretty unconscious till we look at them. But that means something's got to trigger us to look at them.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. I was just about to say, because of the time, but regardless, you're also knocking on the door of the whole free will issue. We don't want to go down there. But being purposeful is kind of creating that whole homunculus, the decider, where is that purpose? And interdependence is saying, well, it's actually all these things coming together. So
conversation continues.
Yes, precisely. I mean, these are wonderful for just opening the vistas for us to look at things more broadly. But they're important things. We should be looking at them. And that's good enough. So let's go ahead and chant that.
May our intention equally penetrate every being and place with the true merit of Buddha's way. Beings are numberless, I vow to save them. Delusions are inexhaustible, I vow to end them. Dharma gates are boundless, I vow to enter them. Buddha's way is unsurpassable, I vow to become it.